So basically, the reason we do this class is because it's really easy to just ask someone for a fit or steal a fit and not really think twice about it or think about like what you can improve or that kind of thing. But I think the much more valuable skill is learning how to fit your own ships because there's always going to be a situation that you aren't necessarily prepared for that you'll need a ship fit for. And so being able to think through fits yourself, how you can tweak them, what, like if someone hands you a fit, what would it be good at, what would it be bad at, that's like a more valuable skill than just being able to identify a fit or like copy a fit and fly it. And so kind of the hope here is not to just give you a bunch of fits, but to give you kind of like principles for deciding how to fit a ship. And then that lets you go from there. And, um, if you're going to go roam, you can figure out a ship that'll work for that. If you're going to go brawl someone, it'll help you figure out that so that you don't have to just ask for a fit every single time you're going to do something. And so kind of the emphasis and the thing that comes up over and over again is that the purpose of the ship is the most important thing when you're fitting it. You can get a really good fit, but it might be terrible for something you're trying to do. Like if you're trying to nano and someone gives you a brawl fit, you could have the best brawl fit, but it's going to do a terrible job at what you're trying to do. So knowing what you're trying to do with the fit, and then making sure that the fit lines up with your goals is kind of like the most important part to fitting. And so kind of some examples of bad things in general would be like, let's say you're going to nullsec and you're going to roam. Bringing an afterburner fit is generally a bad idea, especially if you're like kind of soloing and that kind of thing. There's obviously like exceptions to that, but in general, if you're going to nullsec, you're going to want an MWD fit. And then similarly, if you're going to faction warfare and you're sliding into people in plexes, you're not going to want to be MWD fit for the most part. You're going to want to be AV fit. Now, if you're sitting in there and kiting, that's a different story. But if you're just fitting for faction warfare in general, you're usually going to be an AV fit. And then another example is like having a bomb launcher in high sec. You can't launch bombs in high sec. So fitting a bomb launcher is an absolute waste. So just kind of thinking of these things where like something could be totally fine to put on like a bomber. Like a bomber, it's totally fine to put a bomb launcher on there. But if you're using it in high sec, it doesn't make sense to use that fitting space for a bomb launcher because you can't launch the bomb anyways. So just kind of think about the things and like what you're trying to do with the ship when you're trying to put modules on them. And so when you think about fits, you can kind of generally classify them into what's usually really fast, high DPS ships that are a little bit fragile, and slow tanky fits. They don't always kind of fall into these categories, but that's the bigger like general groups that you can usually fall into. So if you're really stuck on what you should be doing, you can kind of think of those two things. Like, do I want a really tanky fit that's going to be a little bit slower, or do I want kind of a fast, speedy ship? And that can kind of help you decide what way you're going to go with the rest of your fitting decisions. The other thing to think about is what ship class you want to bring for whatever job you're trying to do and what race you pick. And so when you're thinking about those two things, with size, the big difference, I guess this is something I can ask you guys. It's an easy question, or a fairly easy question. Like, if you are trying to pick a ship size, what are kind of the trade-offs with, like, as you go up in ship size?
They became slower.
Sorry, I had you a little quiet. Can you say that one more time?
Yeah, they became slower.
Yeah, exactly. So as the ship size goes up, you get slower, but that would be like the clear kind of drawback to bigger ships. But what's the benefit to that? What do you gain by bringing a bigger ship?
Well, you gain more firepower, more tank, generally more drone bandwidth.
Yep, exactly. So all of those are true. So you get more DPS in general, you get more HP, but at the expense of speed, both speed on grid and also speed warping. So you're not going to get from system to system as fast, and you're not going to be as fast on grid, but you're going to have added damage that you wouldn't have if you brought a frigate, that kind of thing. So that's kind of the key difference there. Oh, go ahead, Tolk.
Like sig radius as well as another
Yeah,
penalty.
yeah, exactly. So the amount of damage that gets applied to you is also part of that. And that's one of the more kind of advanced things to bringing bigger ships, but that is 100% true. The other thing that I kind of want to cover is hull bonuses and classes. So are you guys kind of familiar with how ships work as far as the ship-specific bonuses, like the race bonuses and the roll bonuses?
Yeah.
What about you, Derek and Tolk? Is this something you've kind of been shown before or no?
Yep.
A bit. We see some of the bonuses in the RC classes.
Oh, okay, they covered it a little bit? Okay, perfect. Yeah, let me just bring one up so that you can see. Yeah, so here's an example. So this is a Punisher. You can see that it gets a 10% reduction to small energy turret activation costs. So it costs less to turn the guns on, and it gets a 4% bonus to all the armor resistances. So yeah, this is an example. So you can imagine if you just look at these, it only has, so this is the racial bonuses. It doesn't have a roll bonus because it's a T1. But you can see that this is probably an armor ship, and this probably uses small energy turrets. That's kind of a good place to start when you're thinking about what you want to bring, is just looking at what ships are bonused for. So let me see if I can bring up something that has a roll bonus. So here you can see there's this per level, and then roll bonus. So these roll bonuses are going to be static, which means that the ship is going to have this no matter what. These per skill bonuses are going to be based on your skills. So that's also important to think about, because if you have poor skills for a ship, you might be missing out on these kind of things. So it's always kind of good to keep in mind like how much of a benefit you're getting from these bonuses, where roll bonuses are going to be there no matter what. So just another thing to think about when you're trying to figure out what ship to bring. If there's a skill-based bonus, think about how good your skills actually are there, right? Like you might look at this and you're like, oh, I'm going to do a lot of extra heavy missile damage, right? But if this skill is at 1, that's not going to help you at all, right? You're going to be getting 5% bonus versus what would be like a 25% bonus if you had this at level 5. So that's just another thing to think about when you're looking through fits and that kind of thing. And then kind of the last thing I wanted to talk about is thinking about active versus passive buffer or tank when you're thinking about fitting, and what situations you'd use one in versus the other. So it can always be situational, but can you think of when you might want to have active tank and when you might want to have a passive tank?
If you have dedicated logi, you don't need an active tank.
Yep, yeah, so that's the clearest kind of example of when you wouldn't want active tank. So I guess maybe to back up a little bit.
Another, well,
Yeah.
how about, okay, a certain ship type like a Drake, you would not want to have an active tank, whereas a Raven, you would want to have an active tank just because of the way the ships are?
Yeah, so...
Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, so we can kind of back up and do you guys kind of know so active tank would be a ship where you have to use capacitor to essentially boost your shields back up. So you have shields that you can regen actively during a fight, but it takes capacitor or charges to do that. Where passive, it's basically more buffer, so you can take more damage in general, like to start, but you can't regenerate any of your HP back. And so that's kind of the main trade-off between those two. Is if you're active fit, you have less buffer, so you can take less total damage if you do nothing, but you can actively regenerate some of your health back. And then, like Will Cole said, that's exactly kind of the key example of when you would want buffer. When you have Logi on field that can remote rep you, they can give you HP back, so you don't need to be giving yourself HP back. So then kind of on the flip side of that, maybe one of you, either Derek or Tolku, can you think of like when you would want an active tank fit? Like when are active tank fits really strong? And it's an easy question. I don't mean to make it like super complicated.
Uh, like I guess when you're fighting a smaller ship.
Right. So when you're in a smaller group, or specifically like when you're solo, you'll see a lot of solo fits will have active reps on them because you have no logi, you have no one to back you up. You're committed to a fight usually. You're kind of stuck in it, and so all three of those situations, when you're expecting to be stuck and you can't just leave, when you're alone and you don't have backup, or when you don't have logi on field, all three of those are kind of situations where you might want an active tank. So that's just kind of things to think about again when you're fitting a ship. Like if you're taking something and you know you're going to be maybe stuck on grid, like especially if you're in a bigger ship or something like that. Like those are times when your go-to is going to be an active tank versus if you're going to fit in a fleet. If you know you're going to have logi, like you know you're going to bring a passive fit. So that's just kind of when you're thinking about fitting ships, knowing what context you're going to use it in, that kind of helps you decide whether you're going to do active or passive fit.
Well, in that case, I see a lot of fit for null roaming that they don't have an active tank, even if they are solo.
Yeah, so this is actually another really good point. So I'll ask a follow-up question to that, and we can kind of, hopefully this will get us down the right track. So when you see the passive fits that are for solo roaming and null, are they generally shield or are they generally armor fits?
Shield.
Okay, perfect. So what's different about armor and shield as far as like how they behave in game?
When the reps actually come.
Well, so when the reps come is totally true. But as far as passive goes, let's say you're a passive fit.
Oh, shield regens passively.
Yeah, so shield passively regenerates, armor doesn't. So when you're going to go solo buffer, you'll almost always, not necessarily true, there's some exceptions to this obviously, but it's almost always shield buffer because when you're roaming around, if you get a fight, you survive it, you can go to a safe and you can just wait it out and your shields will passively regenerate. That's not the case with armor, right? So if you go and roam and you get a fight, you survive it, but you lose half your armor, that half your armor is not coming back until you rep. Like go dock up, repair, whatever, that kind of thing. So that's why you'll see solo fits that'll still be passive. They'll almost always be shield for that reason.
Wait, we're talking about null, right?
So that's null, yes. The reason that so the same logic goes for low sec, but you'll actually see a lot more, or I guess the same mechanics are true for null sec, right? Like your armor's not going to regen, but why might you see a lot more buffer fits in low sec that are armor buffer?
Because there's stations everywhere.
Exactly. So you can dock up immediately. So that removes that barrier, right? So you're not going to passively regen, but it doesn't matter because you can just dock up and repair. So that's why.
Can I ask a question on?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, how does it apply? Let's use the Drake for example. It seems like now it's been a long time since I flew the Drake, but it seems like ships like the Drake, uh, they can reach a plateau on the amount of damage they're taking on their shields to what's being applied to it. So say, now let's just say you got a Drake going against 3 assault frigates and its interceptor. It'll only take it down so far, and then you need more DPS to come in and kill it. Is that the passive shields keeping up with the incoming DPS at a certain level?
Yeah, so there's two things that are happening there. It's a little bit weird. It's like a kind of janky Eve thing, but you have passive regen that's a certain amount of EHP per second, but it's actually not linear in that it depends on where your shields are. So there's this spot that's called, like a lot of people will call it your peak regen, which is the spot where your shields are regenning as much as they possibly will. And once you get below that amount, you actually start regenning less EHP passively per second than you did before that. and same with the other side. And so what you're talking about is if you have just a little bit over what they can passively regen, you'll actually get to the spot where for most of it they're not regenning enough, and then you hit their peak regen, and that's where the EHP will be equal to the damage you're doing, and so all of a sudden you can't break them past that point. But if you can push them over that point, then again, like you'll have enough EHP to, or enough DPS to overcome their EHP per second regen. So that point is about a third shields, if I remember right. It's like a third to a quarter. I forget exactly. So I'd have to go look it up to verify. But that's essentially what's happening, is that they have a regen that equals your DPS, but it's actually at their peak spot, usually. So that's why you can get them down part of the way, but not all the way.
Yeah, I want to say I remember it being like 38 to 40%.
Yeah, it's somewhere around there. It's like approximately a third, but I don't know exactly where it falls. You'd have to like look it up again. But yeah, that's the mechanic that's happening. So that's also something to think about is passive fits have a spot where they regen the fastest, and it's around that like third-ish amount. So yeah, so does that answer your question though?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, cool. And so the other thing I kind of want to talk about is general layout for ships. And when you're thinking about armor and shield, there are certain ships that are typically shield and certain ships that are typically armor. And that comes down to the layout most of the time. So again, this should be a pretty easy question, but like where do shield mods go on your ship? If you're thinking like high slots, mid slots, low slots.
Mid.
Yep.
Mid and low.
Yeah, so there are some shield mods that will go in your low slots, but in general, your mid slots are where you're putting your like what I would call your main shield fits or your main shield mods. And what else can go in your mid slots though? So like if you didn't have shield mods there, what other kind of modules would you put in your mid slots generally?
Prop mods.
Prop mod, tackle,
Yep.
E-war.
Yep, exactly. Prop, tackle, E-war, some kind of like what people either call control or support mods, right? And then what about armor? So armor, if you're not putting them in your mid slots, you're putting them in your low slots. What else can go in your low slots if you didn't have armor mods there?
Damage amplifiers, DCUs, nano units, cap,
Yep.
power relays, reactor control units.
Yeah, so the main ones there that you named off would be damage bonds, nanofibers. DCU is also a damage control or a damage mod, so that can go there. But the kind of the main ones you listed off are damage and speed, and cap. There was cap in there. So, but generally, then when you're thinking about it, when you're fitting a shield ship, you're losing control. Like you can fit less painters, less E-war mods, less that kind of thing, but you leave your low slots open for things like damage and speed. If you fit armor mods, you lose that damage and speed, but you open up your mid slots for more control. So in general, when you go armor fit, you tend to have more slots open for tackle, E-war, that kind of thing. If you go a shield fit, you tend to be faster and do more damage, but you lose some of the control that you would have with an armor fit. That's not universally true. There's some exceptions or like fits that work both ways because they have like an absurd number of one slot or the other. But when you're thinking about armor versus shield, that's really kind of the main trade-off. You're going faster, high damage versus slower, more control. Okay, so we covered that. We covered kind of the benefits and drawbacks. And then the other thing that I kind of want to talk about before we actually go into examples of fitting ships is rig slots. So rig slots can be used in a lot of different ways, and it's going to be kind of something that comes down to preference. But when you do a fit, there's kind of two ways I like to do it. Either start with the rigs and use that as like kind of if you're trying to make a fit for a specific kind of niche or something like that. Like let's say I want to make a ham fit. Hams are notorious for not applying well. So one thing you can do is say, okay, I'm going to fit this with heavy assault missiles. I know they don't apply well, so I'm going to put on rigs that help with application. And then you can kind of start from there and then use that to build your fit. Or the other way you can do it, which actually tends to be the way I like to do it better, is I like to make my fit and then see where my fit is kind of lacking. Like, let's say I have a hole in my resistances, or let's say I have a module I want to fit, but I'm just a little short on power grid. Then I can use my rigs to kind of fill the gaps where my fit's lacking. And so you can kind of either do your rigs first or do your rigs last, and it comes down to preference. But just that's kind of where, like, a lot of people don't really think about their rigs. It's kind of an afterthought. But I think it's something that's definitely like worth thinking about ahead of time, whether you want to do like a specialty fit that might really benefit from specific rigs, or whether you want to do like your fit kind of well-rounded and then see where it's kind of lacking to fill in the gaps. Okay, so kind of what I want to do now that covers the basics that I think are important to think about when you're fitting a ship. And so I just kind of want to run through some scenarios and have you guys help me fit some ships, and then kind of through that we'll bring up some of the things you might want to think about in those situations. Do you guys have any questions about what I've covered so far, or just like fits in general, or like Pyfa in general before I go farther?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
I often like to try to oversize one module. Like if I go AB afterburner, I would like to put like the bigger one just to like surprise the enemy with a bigger. The ship it goes almost as fast as a micro warp drive, but with afterburner. But sometimes it's cost me too much to do it in terms of rigs and other modules to make it fit. And some other peoples in the corp suggest me to, if you put more than 3 modules just to make it fit, it's not worth it. What do you think about it?
I would say that's a good general rule. So basically, anytime you do something like what I would call a niche fit, right? So niche fits are anything where you kind of fit something unconventional. So overprop is one example of that. Another fit would be like, we talked about regen, right? So you can actually do max regen fits where they're designed to passively regen like an absurd amount. And so anytime you do kind of fits like that, thinking about what you're giving up to do that is important. So the benefit of overprop is, like you said, you go almost as fast as micro warp drive, not quite, but your fitting is a lot higher. So how many fitting mods do you have to put on there? What would you have put if you had a micro warp drive? And then what benefit are you getting? So you go almost as fast and you're impermeable to scrams if you fit an overprop afterburner. But if you have to do that at the cost of a bunch of fitting mods, like maybe that ability to ignore scrams isn't worth what you're losing, right? So if you're really unsure, or if it's something you really want, I think that by just fitting it up one way, so like fit a standard MWD fit and then fit an afterburner fit, and say, okay, this is what I'm getting from this fit. This is how I would have fit it if I just had an MWD. Is the ability to ignore scrams worth the reduction in everything else that I have if I do like a side-by-side fit kind of thing? So maybe if you remind me at the end, we can actually do an example of that. A deacon's a really good example. So we can talk about kind of what you gain, what you lose, and whether or not it's worth that trade-off. Does that make
All
sense,
right.
though?
Yeah.
Okay, so the first example I wanted to give is pretty straightforward. So do you guys know what a POCO is? I'll take that as a...
Tax collector.
Yeah, so Wilco knows. But a POCO is a player-owned customs office. So this is the thing, if people do planetary interaction, these are put on planets, and it's what people import and export through. And you get a percentage of the taxes collected as things go through it. So anyways, corps will have these put on planets, and that's how they'll get like passive income. So occasionally we'll do something like a bash where you go and you try to kill off someone else's and replace them with yours so that you have more passive income. On the first timer, someone's not expecting you, right? These things have no damage cap, so you can do as much damage as possible, and they have one reinforcement timer, which means you do X amount of damage, and then it stops. It's invulnerable for like a day and a half or something like that, which gives them a chance to prepare and respond. Let's say it's the first timer. Your goal is just to burn through it as fast as possible. What kind of ships might you start to bring? So basically, you're looking for as much damage as possible. You're not expecting to have to run away from anyone. They're probably like asleep. Let's say it's their off time zone. What kind of ships might be good for this?
Le Shack.
Yep. So Leshak is like a go-to number one. What else can you guys think of?
Attack battle cruisers like the Tornado, the Talos, Nega,
Yep. Yeah. Exactly. Perfect. Let's do.
Oracle.
Yep. Yeah. Let's do like one more example. Those are both like perfect. Those are the first two I think of. What's another ship that might be good for this?
Amar battleship.
Yeah, so any of the battleships might be good. They have high DPS, that's two. And then the one I was thinking of is stealth bombers. And the reason stealth bombers is because they're small and cheap, but they have battleship-sized weapons, right? So they have torpedoes, which do high damage. And the reason I say that too is because they're really fragile, right? So they're not good at defending, but you're not expecting a response. But yeah, Leshak ramps up damage, does insane amount of damage. Attack battlecruisers, the kind of the same reason as the bombers. They have a size up for their weapons, so they fit battleship weapons on a battlecruiser. All of those are really good examples. So let's pick. Leshak has a lot of slots. Let's just say. Let's do an Oracle. So an Oracle is a pretty common one. Okay, so here in Pyfa, I can kind of go back. So here we have attack battlecruisers, or you can search. Attack battlecruisers all have oversized weapons, so really any of these would be potentially good ideas to fit. You can go to Oracle. I have some other fits, but I just want to make a new one for the class and have you guys help me work through it. Here in Pyfa, you have Market, so this is going to be where all the modules are that you can fit. You can look at ship equipment. Sorry, it doesn't work when I have my push to talk down. See, turrets and launchers, and then actually before we get too far, let me bring up the basic stats here. Okay, so here is kind of why. So we get 10% reduction in activation cost, we get more damage, and then because of the role, large energy turrets fit better basically and don't use as much of our capacitor. So we can fit big weapons, they don't cost as much. That's basically the take home of the attack battlecruisers. And we'll be using large energy turrets. So we go here, you can see energy turrets, right? And you can see beams and pulse. Do you guys know the difference between beams and pulse?
Range, rate of fire, and energy usage.
Yeah, so this will be true for pretty much every platform. So if you look here, oh, there's a lot there. So if we look here, this is a good example. Hybrids are also a good example. So for pretty much every weapon system, you're going to have one that's higher DPS but closer range, and one that's farther range, lower DPS. In general, the closer up ones also have better tracking, so they apply better than the far away ones. That's, I think, universally true as well, even with missiles and rockets. So here we have pulses, which are going to be the short range one, and we have beams, which are going to be the long range one. So if we're doing a bash against a structure, it's not moving, it's not running away from us, which one do we want?
Close range pulses.
Yep, exactly. So pulse, large, boom. And then here you can see it has all the meta ones, everything. We're going to want the Mega Pulse Lasers, I believe. So we throw these on here. Boom. Okay. So there's 8 high slots. We want 8 guns. Up here it'll tell you how many slots you have. So in high slots, you can have sometimes more high slots than you have hard points for your weapons. And so here we have 8 for 8. But if this was 7, what you would say is like, let's say it was like this. You can have ships like this that might have 7 hard points. This is called a utility high. So it's basically a high slot that can't fit a turret or anything like that. And so it gives you the option to fit something that benefits you in a utility way. So that could be newts, that could be a drone link augmenter that gives you more range, that kind of thing. So here, 8 out of 8, we'll just fill them all up with lasers. Then here we have low slots. It's almost always recommended that you fit a damage control. On anything cruiser down, that's pretty much guaranteed to be the best choice. As you get into bigger ships, there's some cases where that's not necessarily true, but at least to start, I would say always throw a damage control on there. What else? So given that we're trying to do as much DPS as possible, what else might we want to throw on here?
Damage mod and low set.
Yep, so damage mods. So for lasers, that's going to be heat sinks. And then, do you guys know how module stacking works?
You get less and less bonus per duplicate.
Right. Yep. So that's exactly true. Do you guys kind of know where the trade-off, or like, what's the pretty much like the maximum number of the same module that you want to put on?
2.
Yeah, 2 or 3.
Sometimes
So, in general, if you pretty much always want to keep it below 3, 3 being the maximum. After 3, you just don't really get a benefit that's worth the slot ever. Between 2 and 3, it depends on the ship size. So having 3 of the same module on a battleship isn't that bad of an idea. Having 3 of the same module on a frigate is usually a bad idea. So we can throw 3 heat sinks on there, and then actually let me throw... So conflag is going to be the T2 ammo that you would use here. We can see we're doing 700 damage. And you can see here, so it goes up like 160. Here it goes up less than 160. You can see here. And then let's say we just added a 4th one. So it goes from, here I can just turn it off. So you go from 1175 to 1245. So you're doing not even 100 more DPS for one of these modules, where the first one was giving you much, much more, right? Like almost double that. So you're getting half the benefit or less out of this last module compared to the first module. So we'll leave it with 3 here. And then, so we've kind of already hit the spot where we're doing our kind of basic goal, which is to do a lot of damage really fast, right? But we have 0 tank on this, right? The only thing tanking it is a damage control. So we generally want to put at least something on here, right? And then also we can't move around, right? So we have no prop mod to position ourselves. We have no tank whatsoever. So what size prop mod would we want to put on here?
Medium, wasn't it?
Yeah, so...
Well, actually, if you're going to strike the structure, you don't need a prop mod, do you?
Yeah, so this is actually, okay, so that actually brings up a really good point. So here, technically speaking, right, you don't need a prop mod here. We don't expect resistance, but you never want to go in with no defense whatsoever. Like, let's say for some odd chance they did show up, right? Would I want to have no tank and no prop so that I can't do anything? Probably not. And what benefit would I get from putting other things in the slot? So that's another question, is like, what can I put in these mid slots that would help me instead of tank, right? Or instead of a prop? And the answer is nothing, right? Like I can't put anything here that's going to help me with bashing, right? If I put a tackle mod, like let's say I put a point here, right? A point's not going to help me versus a Poco. Let's say I put a tracking enhancer, right? Pocos are gigantic. I can hit them no matter what. So there's not really anything I can put in this slot that would be better than just putting some like minimal defenses. So it makes sense to put some defenses there just because otherwise, like, I have nothing. So if we were to put just like a basic MWD, and then do you guys know, so if I right click here, you can see that variants pop up. Sorry, it won't stay up while I have my push to talk down. But do you guys know kind of the differences between these different modules?
I know like compacts and tech twos and restrained, but I don't really know about the endurings.
Right.
I thought that was like similar to the restrained.
Yeah. So that's like
I
exactly.
know.
Okay. Cool. So we'll go over this. So for every kind of module slot, you have your Tech 1, you have your Tech 2, and then you have what are called metas. So those are kind of the in-between. And in general, there's a little bit of variation, but there's usually always a compact version of a module, which is going to use less CPU and sometimes less less power grid. Not always, but generally. So if we looked at compact warp scramblers, they're not going to use less power grid because they all use just one, but they're going to use less CPU. So let's say I had a fit that's like really close to working, but I'm just a little bit over. I could use a compact to make it work. Restrained, if we look at this and look at attributes, so it's hard without comparing. Here we go. Okay, so you can see here's the maximum velocities, power grid, CPU, and this is a good way to really compare it all. But then you can see, let me highlight this. So here's quad lift, and you can see the signature radius here is lower, and it also has lower capacitor use. So the quad lift means that your signature it'll be a little bit harder to hit you relative to all these other ones, right? And your capacitor use will be a little bit lower than the alternatives. So quad lift tends to be the best one to use in kind of the average case, right? That's not always true, but in general, quad lift is a good kind of baseline one to go. And then you can see the activation cost here. So the activation cost is a little bit higher than the cold gas. So cold gas is going to be the enduring variant. So enduring variants always use less activation cost. Compacts always use less fitting space. And then depending on the module slot or type of module, it will use, like you might have a scoped one, you might have, like for example, micro warp drive, or sorry, not micro warp drives, warp disruptors, scrams, newts all have scoped versions, which are range, as well as enduring and compact. So if you're gonna fit any slot, you have usually the compact is always there, enduring is always there, and then depending on what type of module it is, it might have a different meta variant that's there that has some special bonus, but they're usually consistent across similar types of modules. So here,
Now,
oh, go ahead.
now between the compact and the quad lift, does your speed, your meters per second, change very much?
So that's a good question. So you can see here your maximum velocity is the same for both of them, right? So it's 505% for all three of these. So any of these will give you the same MWD velocity, regardless of what meta you use. And so the reason that MWDs are kind of tricky compared to everything else is if you look at this, so you have the difference, the cold gas has a difference in activation cost, but then there's a reduction in your capacitor. So when you fit an MWD, you actually have less capacitor pool than when you don't have an MWD fit. And so you can see that the quad lift has a smaller reduction. And so there's kind of some funky math with this where depending on what size ship you're in, the quad lift can give you more capacitor time, like time before you run out, than the cold gas does. Not always, sometimes. So when you're in smaller ships, that tends to be the case. When you're in bigger ships, cold gas tends to be better. And so we can kind of see this. I think I can show this as an example. So here we have the quad lift fit. You can see that we run out of cap in 2 minutes and 50 seconds right here. If I go and fit cold gas, you can see it's almost the same, but it's actually 250. So I get a tiny bit of extra cap for fitting a cold gas. This is a larger ship, so that makes sense. If I was in something like a frigate, it would probably be the reverse. But one thing you can do is always you can look at the variance and see which one gives you a better capacitor time. So here again, 1257 versus 1250, sorry. So I said that the wrong way. So I actually get better capacitor out of the quad lift. So even though we're in a big ship, we don't need the signature reduction from the quad lift. We actually get better capacitor, so we might as well keep it that way. Then from here, I'm just going to fit a basic shield tank. Okay, so I just put basic buffer on here because I don't really, so we don't need tackle mods, right, if we're shooting a Poco, so I'll put basic buffer on there, and then that leaves us with kind of 2 slots here empty, so we could just fill this up with damage mods, or we could put a little bit of speed on here just in case something came. Like if we were worried that someone might come, we could put some nanofibers on here so we go a little faster, that kind of thing. But here we have the basic fit, and then we can just fill it out the rest of the way to kind of make this a basic basher, that kind of thing. So I think from here, like these are all kind of up to choice and preference and like the exact situation that comes up. So I won't worry about going through this more. I kind of just want to move on to the next scenario, unless you guys have questions about this. Okay, so it sounds like no questions. So let's move on to another scenario. So let's say you guys we're going to do something that we commonly do, which is just roam out, right? So let's say we're just going to go on a random roam. We're going to filament out, and you're just told to bring something fast. What would you guys start with? Maybe either Derek or Tolk, if you guys want to, like, what kind of ships come to mind, or what kind of things might you want to fly?
A scepter.
Yep, so Scepter is a good example. Let's say you're not an Interceptor because they tend to be like pretty well-defined fits. What would you bring maybe other than an Interceptor? Let's say that's already covered in the fleet or something.
A stabber?
Yep, so Stabber's a good ship to bring. What does the Stabber bring to the fight? Like, what would be the purpose of bringing a Stabber?
DPS.
Yep, so DPS. What would be the difference between, as far as role, bringing a Stabber versus bringing a Caracal?
Range.
Right, so which one has better range?
Caracals usually have better range because of the missiles.
Yep. And so what's the normal platform, like a damage platform on Caracals? Like what kind of damage mods do you pick? Or damage, I guess, highs do you pick?
Autocams?
For the Caracal.
Oh, for the Caracal. Either rapid lights or heavy missiles.
Right. So, okay, so there's actually a good point there is there's 2 options, right? So the common one is rapid lights. Rapid lights are designed to do a lot of damage fast, right? So they do burst damage and then they have a long reload, but they apply really well to small things. So they're kind of designed to be anti-frigate. Heavy missiles actually have longer range. They do more sustained damage, but they apply worse to small things, right? So if you took a heavy missile Caracal, that would actually be a little bit more on par with a Stabber, where you do sustained DPS, but you don't apply as well to smaller things. Stabbers actually apply pretty well to small things, but they don't apply as well as rapid lights. So kind of the trade-off, if you were going to compare a rapid light caracal to a stabber, stabber gives you more sustained DPS. So it gives you more DPS if you're going to do more than one clip of a rapid light. So if something doesn't die in a clip in one reload cycle, you're going to do more damage in that same time with a stabber. But your range is going to be different. So yeah, so that's kind of your trade-off there. So stabber would be a good thing to bring. You would be doing kind of the mainline DPS, not necessarily anti-tackle, but it can kind of double as anti-tackle if you need to. What other ships might be good? Will you give me like one more?
You mean another fast ship?
Yeah, just another ship that would be good for a roam. Yeah.
Thorax.
Yeah, Thorax is good too. What does Thorax bring to the table that might be a little bit different? Like what basic role does it fill, and then what might it bring that the others don't?
DPS, and then depending on what you want, like range, whether you want like super close range or super far range.
Right. So Thorax, you can fit it with rails, and then it gives you a little bit more. It gives you the sustained damage like you would have with the stabber, but it gives you better range. A little bit lower DPS, but more range. Or you can fit it with blaster, and then does really high damage, but you have to be really close. So yeah, so that would be kind of, let's say you're going to fight on gates or something like that, where you expect that you're going to be close to start, and you're not going to have to burn in, or you're not going to have to run away much, then a stabber might be a worse option than a thorax. A thorax might be a better option because you're going to be right on top of them. And the reverse is true, right? Like if you're going to start running away, having a blaster thorax might be a really bad idea, because the second you have to start breaking off, you're not going to be doing any damage anymore. You're going to be out of damage range. So we can try to fit up. Actually, we'll do the kind of the next scenario. So those are all kind of good ships that you could bring. We have kind of common fits in the corp fitting. So let's do one more scenario, and then we'll actually fit this up together. So that scenario is actually a new one, so I haven't done a ton of this, so it'll kind of be like a learning experience for both of us. But let's say someone wanted to go ESS rating. Have you guys, I know we've done a couple like corp ESS rating fleets, but have you guys been on any of those?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so what are kind of the key characteristics of an ESS fleet?
Afterburner.
Yeah, afterburner. So why afterburner?
Because once you're inside the.
Yeah, so inside it essentially scrams you, right? You can't run away, and you can't use MWDs and MJDs. So afterburner is the only way to like move around it without just slow boating. What else is kind of a key characteristic of the ESS?
The Weber.
The what was that? Oh, Weber. Yeah.
The Weber fire.
So you don't have to. So they're already scrammed, right? They can't warp away while they're in the bubble. So you don't need to scram them. But webs are a key kind of thing instead, right? Because if you can keep range inside it, you have an advantage. What about the size of ships? Like, what kind of ships can go into the ESS? Like, can an interceptor go into an ESS?
Oh, cruisers up.
Yep, yeah, so cruisers up. So automatically you're not going to bring a frigate or a destroyer, right? So cruiser, battleship. If we're going out as a group, I would say we're probably going to keep to things that are a little bit easier to move around space. So that would be cruisers or battlecruisers. So I'll let you guys kind of pick. Is there a cruiser or a battlecruiser that you think might be a good fit for the ESS?
I really like the Rupture for to
The
do
Rupture?
that.
Okay. So yeah, let's do a Rupture. Okay, so I have a Rupture. We're going to be inside an ESS, so what kind of high slots are we going to want?
Close range.
Yep, so close range projectiles, right? So autocannons, medium autocannons. 425s are going to be the biggest size. Okay, so there's our high damage close range autocannons. We said AB, right? So we're going to want to go 10 MN is going to be the right size for a rupture, unless we're going over prop, which we can talk about again, over prop and the kind of the trade-off there. So here you can see with the afterburners instead of the MWDs, you can see that we have the enduring and the compact still. So the enduring is going to be like the cold gas. The compact is going to be the same as last time, but we don't have a quad lift. And the reason we don't have a quad lift is because the two bonuses to the quad lift, the capacitor reduction and the signature radius, are both things that afterburners don't have. Afterburners don't boost your signature radius, and afterburners don't reduce your capacitor pool. So that's why we don't have a meta that's the equivalent of the quad lift for afterburners. Okay, so anyways, we have 425s, we have our afterburner for the ESS, and then what's the option here? So if we look at the mediums and the lows, what do we want to choose as far as mediums versus lows for the ESS?
Buffer.
Yep. So buffer's a decent idea. Why would buffer be a better idea here than if we were doing some other things? Like, why would buffer specifically be a good idea for ESS? Like, let's say even if we don't have Logi, like we don't have Logi, buffer is actually still a good idea for ESS, but why?
Because you're most likely not going to be able to get all your reps off.
Right,
or
exactly.
Make use of those reps.
So one of the key things for ESS is you're going to be fighting close, right? So we're designed to fight up close. If they bring a lot of DPS, one benefit to active reps is if it's lower sustained DPS, you can keep up with it, right? But if someone's doing more incoming DPS than you're doing active reps, then you're going to die really fast, right? The second that they can overwhelm your active reps, you die. So if you're in an ESS situation where you're fighting close up with each other, having active reps is a bad idea because they're probably doing high DPS at close range as well. So buffer is a good idea. So do we want to go buffer shield or buffer armor?
Shield?
So in general for a rupture, shield would be good, but let's look at our slot layouts and one of the things you said. So you said that webs is a really key thing, right? So let's say we filled one of these slots with a web, just so we had one. That leaves us with 2 slots for shields, right? Which could be okay. That's not terrible. Like we could put a shield extender and an invuln or something like that. But we also have 5 slots for lows. So I would say probably for an ESS rupture, I would go with armor. So if we go with armor, we can just start with, again, actually let's start with the damage control. So, and that actually, but a good point there is that that kind of comes down to the talk we were having before, where you have a trade-off, right? So we could even forgo the web, right? And we could fit all shield here, and we could actually have a pretty strong buffer, shield buffer fit, and we could have more DPS, but we're not going to have as much control. So our ability to escape might not be awesome. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like, if we think that we're going to be able to DPS rush people down, it might be better to go with all DPS here, shield buffer here, and then we could just burn people down when they come in. One thing, though, is that if we're raiding someone else's ESSs, they have a chance to respond to us. So it's generally better to have the ability to disengage or to, like, help you get yourself out, and so having webs or something like that might be better.
Because essentially it's the same number of slots. Either you're going armor or shield, because if you put a webifier, you still have 2 slots for tank, and follow slot, once you do the damage controls and 2 damage mod, you still have two slot for tank 2.
Right. So you could go, okay, so what I would say is that what we have right now is the essentials, right? I wouldn't take off, I would not drop this no matter what you went. I would keep the afterburner, and no matter what you go, I would keep the damage control. So I would say from here, these are going to be, this could be shield or armor at this point, right? And that leaves you with 3 medium slots and 4 low slots. So you do have, like, I think we'll still fit a gyro. So, oops. So we'll fit at least 1 gyro, and then yes, you're right. That leaves us with 3, we could potentially put 3 shield tank mods, or we could put 3 low tank mods. But the question here is, would we benefit more from being a little bit slower and having some control in the mid, or would we benefit more from having a little extra DPS here, but losing that control? And so again, like this isn't like a hard cut rule, right? So it could be better off in either one situationally. There's definitely situations where one would be better than the other, and vice versa. So I'm not trying to say that armor would specifically be better, but at least for me, I would say that I think having a web would be a little bit better in this situation, just because I would like to have the ability to web someone away and try to get out of range if I could, given that we might be outnumbered if more people come into us, since we're the aggressors, right? Does that make sense? How, like, number one, it's kind of situational and it's also a preference. No, you're good.
Yeah. Even if it's a fleet and a lot of people have control mod, then it can't influence your choices.
Yeah, so that could definitely influence your choices too, right? Like, let's say you already have a bunch of webs, right? If we already have 4 webs, 5 webs in fleet, why would I bring another web? Because again, the same stacking penalties that apply to modules also apply to things that you're running on other people. So if we have three webs on someone, a 4th web or a 5th web isn't going to do very much. So there is something to be said for, you can spread webs out across an enemy fleet. So if you're equal size and everyone in your fleet has a web and everyone in their fleet doesn't, you can be better off with webs. But again, like, if you have a lot of webs, that's not necessarily required. Like, you could 100% forgo it. Or if you have ships that are bonus for webs, right? Like, let's say we want 4 webs, we have this, but somebody's bringing a Vigilant, which has a really strong web bonus. Then why would I be the one to fit one of those 4 webs? It doesn't make sense. It would be better for me to go with just more tank mods or a different control mod instead of that. So yeah, you're 100% right that the rest of your fleet will influence it.
What about the penalties? Because, like, doesn't shield have a different penalty than low, like armor, sig radius penalty versus
Right.
agility?
So shield increases your sig radius. Armor reduces your speed. Yeah. So here, if I put an armor mod on, we can do that. So for this, I'm just going to make the call that we'll do armor. Again, like, that's not even the best choice necessarily. It's like you could go either way. But let's just say I put on an armor plate, right? So we can see my speed goes from 620 to 599. So I lose like 21 speed here. But if they, let's say they don't have webs, right? So we have webs, they don't. Then they're going to be going half my speed when I throw a web on them. So here I put a web, and it reduces their speed by 55%, right? So here, even though I'm losing 21 speed, that's nowhere close to half my speed, right? So if I can web someone off, then that person is always going to be going slower than me if I have a web and they don't. Does that make sense? So in this context, if I can fit a web, it would probably be better for me to do this. Again, that's not like, there's some options you can make here. So like, let's say we really wanted, so let's say we want to have a web no matter what, just because we think it'll be useful. We could still go with a shield fit, and we could go large shield extender, and we could do a multi-spectrum. So here, this would be like a fine fit still, and we could put maybe 2 more gyros and something in the last low. That's totally viable. Or we could go, 1 web or 2 webs, or we could go 1 web and a tracking enhancer so that we could maybe shoot out a little bit farther or something like that. So these are all options that we can make. But let's just say, okay, so let's stick with this instead of the armor, just because you guys were talking about it. That lets us keep this last gyro, or we can do like 3 gyros, and then what would you guys want to put in this last low slot?
Nano?
Yeah, so nano might work. So because we don't have these extra control slots, it might be fine to put a nano.
I got a question about the nano.
Yeah, go for it.
Since we're doing an armor fit, doesn't a nano take away from armor? Wouldn't an overdrive injector be a better choice?
So nano takes away from, let me double check. It should be structure. Yeah, so it takes away from structure, not armor, but it does take away your HP. So that is a good point. Do you know why you would go nano versus inertial stabilizer versus an overdrive, like you mentioned? Like those 3 mods are kind of the quote-unquote speed mods that alter your speed, but why would one be better than the other in different situations?
Well, the inertial would be better for line time, I think. So, like if you want to travel scepter, overdrive injector would directly do speed, and then the nano, I think, kind of does both. It would be kind of a mix of both the overdrive and the inertia. Gives you more agility and a little bit more speed, but it takes away your hit points.
Yep.
If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So you lose some structure hit points, but you gain a little bit of speed and a little bit of agility, which is your align time. But yeah, that's exactly right. And then inertial stabilizer gives you more pure align time, so you align faster, but it also increases your signature radius. And then overdrive gives you pure speed, but nothing else. So one thing we can look at is the align time on this without the nanofiber. We can see we're at 5.71. So the way that CCP rounds in game, this ship will always warp on the 6th second after you have initiated warp. So you'll initiate warp, it'll align, it'll take 6 seconds, and then it'll go into warp. If we have this nanofiber, it drops down to 4.8, so it'll round up to the next highest number, which will be 5, so it would take 5 seconds to warp. So by doing a nanofiber, you're going to warp 1 second faster gate to gate. And then you'll go a little bit faster. So if we look at the speed, if we have the AB on, you can say 620 versus 679. So we gain like 59 meters per second. If we go with an overdrive here, you can see it's 698, so we gain a little bit more. But if we turn the AP off here, so we stay at 6 second align time. So if we're not roaming around much, overdrive would totally be better. But if you're roaming around a bunch, I almost always like nanofiber better, because you almost always get into a situation where there's more guys chasing you than you want to fight, and you have to make space between you and them. And so having that extra second align time basically means that if they were fit, tankier, heavier, anything like that, you're going to be warping gate to gate faster than they are. So in nullsec at least, I generally like to fit nanofiber unless there's a clear reason not to. Like if you're going with a whole tank, so like a structure tanked ship, you would never want to fit a nanofiber, right? Because it takes away your structure HP. But in general, I like nanofiber over an overdriver for that reason. Not always, but sometimes.
Okay, thank you.
Is the overdrive mechanic still the same where it opens up your top speed by a percentage, but then that also affects your time to warp because of the warp speed mechanics?
Oh, yes. If you have your, are you talking about if you have your MWD on or just in general? Oh, yeah. So it would be,
Yeah, so your overdrive increases your top speed by a percentage, but because the warp initiation takes 70% of your maximum speed, it takes longer to go into warp rather than if you've got a nanofiber, it doesn't increase your top speed, it just allows you to go faster, if that makes sense.
right. Yeah. I see what you mean. I believe that's true. I haven't played with it enough to see where that ends up being the case because of the rounding and stuff. I think that sometimes it'll cause you to go into warp, later, sometimes it won't. But yeah, so because of the fact that warping is a percentage of your base speed, and this increases your base speed regardless of whether or not you have your MWD on, that is true, I believe. I'd have to double check. It's not actually something I've looked into, but I think you're correct there.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've used overdrives.
Yeah.
Nano is the meta.
Yeah, I actually have one on my interceptor, but that's because it already aligns really fast. So it doesn't really need another nano. Yeah, okay. So anyways, let's just say we have this fit. So we decided shield was better so that we can just do max DPS. We have a web to kind of keep some range control. What else? The way this sits now, what kind of things do you maybe see that could be improved here? Since we have
More
our...
passive tank.
Oh, go ahead.
I will put more passive tank, like 3 medium shield extender rig.
Okay, so yeah, a medium shield extender is definitely a good way to go.
For the ESS, since because we are fighting close range, and you explained that we need a lot of passive.
Right, yep, yeah, exactly. So shield extenders would be a good way to go. Let's say we just want to put, let's say we put 2 on, right? So if we put 2 on, what could we put in this third slot? Like what might we be missing? Still, even, so buffer's a good thing, but we can put anywhere from 0 to 3 extra buffer on there, right? So it's kind of like a filler, I guess, if that makes sense. So we can fill it up with more buffer. That definitely wouldn't hurt us, but that's maybe not like absolutely required. So what are some other options of things we could do with the rigs that we might be missing?
EM resist.
I like to.
Yeah, so EM resist is a good one. So if you look here, our lowest is 35% versus like 48% or whatever. So if you look at this, you can actually change the type of incoming damage. You can see like if it was uniform, we'd have 22k EHP. If we're against EM, so let's say we're against a missile boat that's shooting EM, we only have 20k, so we lose like almost 2k EHP. If they're shooting EM solely. So yeah, so EM hole might be a good thing to plug. What are some other options?
I always like to try to put a damage rig in there.
Right, yep, so another option would be a damage rig. So we could put something like, if you go here, rigs, just a second. Okay, there we go. So yeah, so you can put, you can look at these and like collision accelerator is more damage, burst aerator does more damage. Some of these other ones adjust your optimal and your fall off and that kind of thing. But yeah, that's another one. We could put like a collision accelerator on here. So if we put collision accelerator, you can see, oh, we don't have ammo loaded. Just a second. Okay, so up close, we're doing 585 damage. Would be 544. So we're getting 40 DPS basically, give or take, if we put that ambit on there. So that's an option. EM rig's an option. Either of those are good options, and then even just like more buffer. So the having just the extenders on there is also a good idea. So any of those are viable options, and it's just up to like personal choice and that kind of thing.
Would there be a situation where a targeting rig to increase your scan res would be viable?
So in the ESS, probably not. For what reason would that be? I guess we'll have maybe Tolku or Derek. Can you think of why in ESS having a scan rig would not be very helpful?
Oh, what rig? A scanning rig?
Yeah, so okay, so we can explain this too. So here you can see there's scan res. So this is basically your how well you target other objects. The
Oh,
higher
yeah,
this number
scanning
is,
resolution.
the faster you lock
Yeah.
things, right?
Because
So
you're not like you don't need to like half a second isn't really going to improve your fight.
right,
guess.
and why would it only be half a second? Like, what is it that about an ESS specifically that means there won't be much lock time difference if you have better scan res?
Because nobody's warping off.
So that's not it. What about, so let's say I'm in a battleship, right? If I lock another battleship, does it take very long? Probably not, right? If I try to lock a frigate, it takes forever, right? So the ship size is what.
Oh, everyone's in cruisers.
Right. So
Or
everyone's in larger ships, so that means that everyone's going to lock fairly fast. If I was gonna, let's say I was going to do the same thing, but I was gonna try to fight on a gate or something like that. Scan res in that instance might actually be a good idea because there's a good chance that there's going to be some fast tackle that comes through that might be able to close the gap and like get a orbit on me before I could lock them. So if I was in something like this and I was trying to like brawl on a gate or something like that, then scan res might be a good idea. Depends on the context. I think a lot of times there's still things that are better, but it might not be the worst idea. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So anyways, so this would be a fit you could totally take into an ESS and it would be fine. It might not be the best. I mean, like I haven't spent time like looking through and thinking about it, but this would like be a good baseline that you could adjust from here to decide whether or not you want to do. Oh, and we have plenty of fitting room here. We have an empty slot. So what would you want to put here?
nothing.
You say nothing?
Oh wait, no, we have a missile, right? I'd fit a missile.
Yeah, so you could put a missile. You could put a neutralizer. So we have plenty of cap. We're cap stable. Our guns don't rely on capacitor. So if we're up close, I would prefer to put a neutralizer on here, but you don't have to. You could put like a rapid light missile launcher or something like that instead, or a heavy missile launcher since you're only going against cruisers. Or those would be good.
Festival launcher.
If you have no fitting space left or barely any fitting space left, you could put a festival launcher and just shoot whatchamacallit, fireworks at people. But
Fireworks are always cool in PvP. I'm sorry.
But I would probably put something like this. Yeah, so you could put a medium in it. And again, this could be optimized. Like, so I have extra fitting space, but I only put an enduring here. I'm not too worried about capacitor. 16 minutes is a really long time. So that can get bumped up to T2. Same thing, there's plenty of room, so this can get bumped up to T2. So you can do all kinds of things like that to kind of bump up anything that's missing in your fit. Like, I don't know if I would put another gyro stabilizer, but you could put like a tracking enhancer here just in case you get in a fight where you're fighting something smaller. Like, let's say you get in a fight before you get to the ESS, having a tracking enhancer might be nice. So you could put a tracking enhancer there just in case, or that kind of thing. Okay, so that kind of covers this whole kind of the basics and kind of walking through. And like you guys brought up, you know, we could have gone armor, we went shield, or we could do vice versa. Like, there's always like a lot of decisions to make when you're fitting something. So I think it's less so about like, oh, this is the best fit, and more so about just thinking about what you're gaining or losing when you make certain choices. Did you guys have any questions about this in general or other things in Pyfa that are more advanced? Because I've only covered kind of like the very, very basics, but there's a lot more you can do with it. Okay. So I'll call that good for the fitting stuff. Do you guys know how the graphs and stuff in Pyfa work? I know Toku, you've been playing with it a little bit, but Derek,
Yeah,
do
I
you know
still have
much
some.
about it?
I was able to open the window, but that's about it.
Okay, so I'll just do really quick that, and then I'll call that kind of the last thing for the class. So when you have a fit up, what you can do is you can go to this fit tab, and there's that graphs option. And then what it does is it pulls up a graph. You can select what you want to look at. So I can look at how much is neuted, how much is ship reps. I can look at how much shield regen. So if I wanted to look at a passive fit, I could do this. So there's a bunch of different things you can look at here, but most common is damage. You can see here's the fit I have fit. It has the type of ammo I'm using right now, and then it says ideal target here. So you guys kind of know signature radius, the speed of something flying, and all that plays into how much damage you actually apply versus what this number here says. So obviously I'm not always going to be applying 560 DPS. It's going to be something below that if I'm not hitting perfectly. And so this is saying if I hit perfectly, this is what the damage looks like. And then what you can do is you can go over to fittings you have saved. And you can pull up just like a basic ship that you want to compare to, and you can see this is a malediction, so it's going to be really fast, really low sig, and you can see I'm essentially not applying at all, right? I'm doing 0 damage to, or almost 0 damage to this malediction. So depending on, let's pick something that it actually applies to. Okay, so here we have a thorax fit. I don't know exactly how it's fit, to be honest, but you can see that I apply mostly, like pretty well to this thorax. So I'm going to remove the malediction since it's not really doing anything, and I'm going to remove that. And then this is close range, so I'll just zoom in. So here it has the distance, right? And since 0 to 20 is really the range I'll be fighting at, you can do this. And so you can see I'm applying just over 500 DPS at 2.6 or so. But what this says here is this is the, so the way to think about these circles is this is where you're positioned and this is where your target's positioned. And you're both at the center of these circles going towards the dot. So this is saying you're stationary, but let's say I pulled this way, right? What Pyfa is saying is this is me going in a straight line upwards, and this is them going in a straight line upwards. So if I was like this, I would be going in a straight line towards them, and they would be going in a straight line up. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Wait, why wouldn't you? So if you're going both in the same direction, right? That's when your transversals are pretty much the same.
Right, minus the speed
that-
of the two ships.
So that theoretically should be when you have the best tracking rate.
That's correct, yes.
Wait, then why is it like even when it's like at 0 or like at like 1 or 2 kilometers, it's such low damage? Shouldn't it like start at the max? And then
Oh, like down here? Or yeah, so that's a good question. Let's see. Yeah, so I don't know exactly why. So
May I offer an opinion?
yeah, go for it.
Well, you've got look at the ship sizes. You got an interceptor going after a cruiser.
Oh, this is swapped to a
So you
cruiser
got the
though.
smaller weapons.
Yeah, this is
Isn't
swapped to
that a
cruiser.
malediction and a thorax? You said.
No, it's a rupture versus a thorax. I took off the malediction.
Oh, I misheard. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I think it
Never
has.
mind.
Yeah, so I think it has to do with the tick where the damage is calculated. I would have to look at it exactly to figure out why you're not doing the maximum damage at your optimal. But it depends on the instance. Like I don't actually know how this thorax is fit. It's saved from a while ago. So it's 50
Is it not
MN, but
because
it doesn't have the afterburner on. So like if we turn this on, there we go. So if we turn this on, you can see that you apply best at a little bit before, but not quite. Yeah, I guess I don't know, that's a good point. I don't know exactly why you aren't applying best at your optimal. It just has to do with the tracking and the angles.
Then it's yeah, I guess that makes sense.
But
Or no, it doesn't make sense, but like it's important to know that you shouldn't be at 0. You should be at like 3 or 4
right,
kilometers.
yeah, and again, it gets a little tricky because it's not always the most intuitive for this reason. Like you won't always apply exactly. Well, okay, so I think this is why if you're going the exact same speed, right? If they were both 287, and you were both at your optimal, it would essentially be the same as if you were going 0, right? So if this was at 0, this was at 0, the damage should be the same as if you're both going straight in the exact same speed. But when you're both going the same direction at a speed and you have slightly different speeds, your transversal is going to look different. Like the tracking math is going to be different depending on how close you are. Does that make sense? So if you're really close and going a little bit faster, it's going to look like you're orbiting the ship or going around the ship a lot faster than if you're 100 kilometers away going the same difference. So like if I only go 10 meters a second difference, so if I go 10 meters a second faster, but I'm 20 kilometers away, my rotation is going to be a lot smaller than if I'm going that same 10 meters a second, but I'm 500 meters away. Does that make sense?
Wait, but are we orbiting or are we just going in a straight line?
So as far as like, if you think about the perspective of your ship, if someone's going faster than you, even though you're both going in a straight line, it's going to look like they're orbiting some. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, like if you
Oh,
only...
so it's because he's faster than me.
Right,
Oh, okay.
exactly. But if you were in the same speed, it would look like identical. It would look like they're stationary, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of where it plays in. If they were the identical speed, I think you're right that you would apply best at your optimal because it would look like you're essentially going, you're both stationary since you're going the same direction. Yeah. But yeah, so it's a little tricky because it depends on the speed of the ships, the SIGs, like all that kind of stuff. But yeah, that's the basics of it. So let me see.
So the most extreme though, right, would be like if they're going opposite directions. Like if you just wanted to test out.
Right, so you can go like this. That's more extreme, and you can see you're doing less damage. If you're going like this, you do a little bit. Yeah, so I mean, you can play around with it and see where you would be doing the most damage and where you'd be doing the least damage and that kind of thing. But yeah. So you can play around with it. Basically, I just kind of want to show you the how this works and what it means to be like this. This means you're burning right at where they are now. This would be you're burning at where they're going. This would be they're burning straight away from you. This would be you're falling right after them. That kind of thing. So you can see, like, here's you guys burning in a straight line. So they're burning away from you. You're following them. And you're doing like essentially perfect damage, right? Okay.
Wait. So when it's left or right, it's me following them, but if it's up and down.
So okay. So what it is like imagine you are the center of the circle. Your enemy is the center of this circle.
Oh, okay.
And then the dot is where they're going to be in the next second, or where they're headed in the next
Yeah.
second. So yeah, so this would be following, this would be you're burning in opposite directions, right? This
Yeah.
would be perpendicular. Yeah, so that's why up would be like you guys are flying side by side.
Hmm.
So yeah, this would be like you're both flying straight up side by side.
I like to think of it like if I was sitting in a man turret, like in the old World War II bomber, and if we are going in the same direction, like the arrow are now, how I will have to work for tracking the other plane versus if I following like the two were pointing to the right, like previously, the speed had no effect at all because it's just a point in right in front.
Right, yeah, exactly. So yeah, when you think about it that way, that's kind of how I think about it too. Is I try to think of it as like I'm pointing or I'm trying to shoot at the other person, and this is where they are now. This is where they're going, and so depending on like where they're going and how fast, I would have to like move my gun to follow them at different speeds, and the faster I would have to move my gun, the harder it is to track them essentially. So yeah, I think we're essentially saying the same thing or talking about tracking in the same way. But yeah, so this would be this. Like I said, you can put a smaller ship and a bigger ship to see, how well do I fly to one versus the other, depending on like how they're flying. If I pull up a frigate again, so go. So here, I think this kind of shows a little bit better too. Like, if you're flying side by side, this is flying a lot faster. But if they're far enough away, you're still actually tracking decently because you're going in the same direction. Here, they aren't. Why does that track better? Oh, so yeah, so you still track okay, but then if you're stationary, more or less stationary, and they're going perpendicular, you don't apply very well. But then if someone rams you, like if they're just trying to come in and tackle you, this is why you don't ram, right? So even though this is a frigate and it's hard to hit, if it's coming straight at you, you do full damage. So anyways, this graph is just a way to kind of look at how well people apply based on how they're flying. But it's also a way to look at different types of ammo. So if I come over here,
What is the sharp dip in the damage in the middle of the graph?
so that's a good question. That's your web of fire range. So
Oh,
that actually explains a lot of. I didn't think about that. So if you have your web of fire off, now I think the application is gonna make a little bit more sense, maybe. So here, yeah, I guess it's still the same because they're both within web of fire range. But you can see this dropped off a lot, and it kind of comes back up. Here, if you have the web of fire on, you apply a lot better before, like as long as they're within web of fire range, you apply well, and then the second they get out of web of fire range, their speed's gonna be higher. So they're gonna be half the speed within the closer range. So that's why.
thanks.
Okay. So then what I wanted to do is just show you briefly, like if you wanted to compare ammo types, I've just copied the same fit. And I just call it copy for now. And I can just drag it on here, and I can show the difference when I have long range ammo fit. So you can see, like obviously over 10 kilometers, I'm doing more damage with the long range ammo, but I'm doing less up close. So if you wanted to compare damage types, you could just copy a fit, use the other damage type, and then pop it in here. And it'll show you, tracking difference and that kind of stuff. The other things you can do in Pyfa, just to have be aware of it, is there's boosters. So let's say you wanted to look at how a certain drug helps you. So So here we have crash. You can look at the attributes. Explosion radius, so you apply better, which is not what I want for this because this isn't a missile ship. But you can, just to show you, so you can have a, like put a drug on and then you can toggle it on and off to see what it does. Obviously this isn't going to do anything. But yeah, so you can do that. The other thing you can do is you can look at projected. So this is going to be if someone's putting remote anything on you. So if someone's doing like shield ship, so shield links. If I took something like a Stork or a Bifrost. So here's a Bifrost. Let's turn that on. There we go. So we have a shield command burst. We put extension charge in it. So here our rupture has 22k EHP. If I go take that Bifrost, I can drag it onto the projected and let's see. Oh, I put the wrong charges in it. Just a second. Field extension. Should be just a second here. Huh. So it should be applying here. Oh, because I don't have. There we go. On command. There we go. Okay. So, sorry about that. So here we go from 22k to 24k when we have the links on. So you can see how much links affect you. And then projected would be like if you want to see if someone does sensor damps on you, or if someone's putting tracking on you, or if someone puts a target painter on you and you're a small ship, you can see any of those kind of effects would be projected. And then command is command bursts. Does that all kind of make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So there's other things you can do with the graphs, but I'll let you guys kind of play around with that. There's like a lot that you can do in Pyfa. We didn't even really talk about all the things over here, but it basically gives you like every stat. It gives you the approximate price. It lets you compare different module variants, all that kind of stuff. So it's definitely worth playing around with, and I think once you get used to it, it's a lot easier to play with fits in Pyfa than it is to play with fits in game. Just because you can look at like different variants and what the trade-offs are and all that kind of stuff. Alrighty. Okay. Is there any last minute or like final questions before we call it? Okay, cool. So I'll call the class. We'll call that good. And then if you guys have any questions after the fact, just poke me and let me know, and I'm happy to